all right. Good morning, Green Valley. Who's happy to be in church today? I dressed for 105, and it's 62 out there. It's beautiful, man. Hey, it's good to have you here today. Years ago, when my nephews were really, really young, 4 to 6 years old, I had 2 nephews, and they loved football, they loved sports. So they came to our house in Ellensburg, Washington, and we had a massive front yard with a great, grass in the front. And so we got a football game together because they wanted to play football. And so it was me, my 2 nephews, against my oldest daughter, who was 27 at the time, their mom, who was 30-something, and then my sister, who was in her 50s, and then my wife, who was, we're not going to tell her age. So anyway, we were having a great game, and I got the 2 nephews together, and I called a fantastic play. It was an amazing play, and got them up there, and one nephew was going to go out here, and I was going to fake the pass, and sure enough, that went great. I hiked the ball, he went there, I faked the pass, and then the play was just to hand it to my other nephew and let him run and try to go, and so it's all just kind of fun. So everything went the fake pass went good. I gave it to my nephew. He came up to the line, and then my oldest daughter went after him to tag him, and he took off and ran the other way. And I mean, he just kept running out into the street, and he just kept running with the ball. And what's interesting is I assumed that he would know which direction to go. I would assume that he knew the boundaries. But because he didn't know the boundaries or the goal of the game, he got confused and went in the wrong direction. Now think about it when you were young, guys, or maybe some gals too, is you would have to create boundaries for your own football game. And they were creative boundaries, right? You'd be out in the street and you go, hey, at the end of Mrs. Johnson's driveway is one end zone, and then, Johnny, your brother's car at his trunk is the other end zone, and then the 2 curves on the edge of each side of the road, those are the out of bounds, and the fire hydrant's the first down. Anybody ever did in boundaries like that? Remember those days? Now, why did you do that? You did it for 2 reasons. So you would know where to go and how to play the game and what the goals were, but also so that you would have fun and enjoy the game. Now, right from the beginning of time and creation, God set boundaries for his entire creation, for them to function, for us to enjoy. Matter of fact, in Proverbs 8:29, it says, he gave the sea its boundary so the waters would not overstep his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth. In Psalm 74, it says, both day and night belong to you. You made the starlight and the sun. You set boundaries of the earth, and you made both summer and winter. Boundaries are all throughout his creation. It's also within our relationships. God set boundaries. Now, we're going to dive into some scripture today, but there's a book that I'd like you to read if you get a chance. It's by Cloud and Townsend, and it's called Boundaries. It's one of the best books on relationships you'll ever read. But I encourage you to do that. And their overall quote from their book that kind of summarizes the whole book is this: boundaries are a property line, knowing what we are responsible for and what we are not responsible for. Boundaries are to keep the good in and the bad out. And here's the deal. Whether you're in a marriage, a friendship, whether you're in a church community, a work community, whether you're in a class at school and have a friend community, in order for our relationships to be healthy, to be fun, to go in the right direction, we need to understand them so that we don't run into all kinds of conflicts or misunderstanding or resentment or hurt or brokenness. But the problem with the world is, especially in our relationships, is that we tend to violate relational boundaries. And this is where the conflicts and the problems come from. And there's basically 3 kinds of people who violate relational boundaries. Now, here's the deal. All of us tend to lean towards 1 or 2 of these. So don't sit there and elbow the person next to you while I read them, okay? The first one is controlling people. They tend to infringe on other people's boundaries because they want things to go their way. And controllers come in different flavors. Some are nice controllers with good intentions. They actually want what's best for you. But what they want is what they think is best for you, not considering your own feelings or thoughts. There's another flavor of controller. And these are steamrollers. They're just aggressive. And many times they use anger to force things to go their way. Some controllers are passive aggressive. They use passive things that help you understand that you're not doing what you should do. Indirect words and actions to try to steer you in the right direction. Phrases like, nobody ever helps me around here. I guess I'll be all by myself tonight. Nobody ever thinks of me. Or actions like telling you they're going to be at an event, but because you did something wrong, they on purpose don't show. Or they show with an attitude the whole time, like, yeah, I guess I'm here. I guess I'll have to endure tonight. How many of you have someone in your relational world that you may say is a controller of some kind? Controller of some kind. Raise it real high. Be proud. Is that person next to you right now? Do not answer that question. Not answer that question. Here's the second kind of violators. It's compliant people. Compliant people want peace at all costs. Anything that might start an argument or disagreement, they'll just push it down because they don't want to hurt anybody. They want everyone to like them. They want smooth sailing. Let me ask you, how many of you here at least lean toward being compliant? Raise your hand. Okay, raise it up real high for a second. I'm going to see. See how compliant they are? I could have had them stand and they would have stood. Here's the violation of compliant people. Compliants are guilty of violation of the truth because you never really know how they feel or what the state of your relationship is in. Now, there's a third category of violators of boundaries, and that's conceited people. And this one kind of speaks for itself. They're narcissistic. And so they do things based on what they want, how they feel, and they don't really care about what other people think or feel. They just want what they want. And I'm not going to ask who leans towards the conceited, all right? But here's the thing. Whether you lean towards conceited or controller or compliant, you can do damage in a relationship. You can do damage to your own heart and the heart of other people based on your violation of boundaries and how you violate them. You see, boundaries in relationships are part of God's wisdom to live healthy lives, to have healthy relationships. And we're in this series, A Word to the Wise, how to foolproof your life. And one of the places we need a lot of wisdom is when it comes to our relationship. Now, the book of Proverbs is full of relational wisdom, but the scripture that kind of overrides everyone is the 30,000-foot level scripture that summarizes our relationships and how we should create our own boundaries to have healthy lives is this. It's Proverbs 4:23. It says, above all else, meaning this should be your top priority, guard your heart. Why? Because the heart is the center of all issues of life. For it is the wellspring of life. What does that mean? Your well-being, your joy, your contentment will be contingent upon how well you have guarded your heart. And here's the thing. If you and I can establish healthy boundaries in our relationship, it will lead to a healthy me, which then leads to a healthy we. So this is what I want to talk about today is what does it look like to create healthy boundaries so I can have a healthy me and a healthy we. Now there's three things we're going to tackle today. The first one is you learning how to establish your boundaries. The second one is enforcing your boundaries. And the third one is how to express love through boundaries. This is going to be a great time. So put on your thinking caps and stay with me and focus. Get your whatever you need, some more caffeine, but let's stay in this because this is really important to how the community of God works and how we work on an individual level. So here the first one is this. Establish your boundaries. We all have limits. Limited time, energy, limited emotional capacity, which means there's a limit to ourselves about giving ourselves to other people. So if we don't implement boundaries, our commitments and our priorities will tend to outweigh our capacity. Let me give you an example. This is a great story. It's a pet store delivery truck was going down the road, and this guy kept getting out at every stoplight. He grabbed the 2x4 and he started banging on the back on his trailer, just banging it. Then he'd get up and he'd go do it again. Every stoplight he got out, and this guy's following him. He's going, what's this all about, man? So he stops, rolls down the window and says, hey, dude, what are you doing? Why are you banging on your trailer? And he says, this is only a 2-ton truck, and I'm carrying 4 tons of canaries. I got to keep 2 tons of them in the air all the time. How many of you have ever thought about that in your relational world? We all have limits. Even Jesus had to live with limits in his humanity. Now, think about this. We know Jesus loving, compassion, loved people. His whole life was about people. That was his mission, to save people. So this is the premier relational guy of all the world ever. Watch what happens here. In Mark chapter 1, it says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up and he left the house where he was staying to go to a solitary place where he was praying. Then while he's there, some of the disciples, Simon and his companions, came to look for him, and when they found them, they exclaimed this, everyone is looking for you. Now let me just pause there. Moms, have you ever felt that way where everyone was looking for you? How many moms have felt that? Raise your hand right now. You felt that way before, yeah. That's a lot of emotional pressure, a lot of relational pressure. But listen to how Jesus responds to that. He says, let's go somewhere else to the nearby villages. Now, how could Jesus go somewhere else where the people in the village needed him to heal them, to teach to them, needed him to pray for them? How could he leave them to go to another village? And the answer's right here in the passage. He says, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come. You see, Jesus, even though he had a great love for people, had a limited capacity in his humanity. So in that moment, he can't be 2 places at once. He can't meet all the needs of these people and then go see these people and teach to them. There were limits, there were boundaries that he had to set in order for him to function and fulfill his mission. My question to you is, how many of us manage our limited amounts of time and energy so that the people who are most important get our best? Because here's the truth. The truth is this: the people that usually don't get our best are the ones who are usually most important to us. And you want to know why? It's because we think they'll understand. But actually what you're doing is you're violating a boundary that is setting you down a line where that relationship is going to be in turmoil. Years ago, I was out of balance in my youth pastoring, and I've told you about that before. We're in Modesto. God granted us favor with these gang kids, and our youth group went from 22 to 200 in about 6 months, and these kids that came in had a lot of needs. Many of them didn't have parents. Many of them were affiliated with gangs or in gangs, so they were in all kinds of trouble, in and out of juvenile hall. And I remember that my passion for these kids to know Jesus was just at an all-time high, so I spent time at juvenile hall and going to these houses and ministering to these kids and being on the campus. But the problem was the person that needed me most, or the persons that needed me most, were my wife and daughter. And so all of a sudden there's this tension that started to build between my wife and I, because the people that needed my attention most were getting the worst of me, the leftovers of me, because I was giving my best to these kids who needed it, but are not at the top of the priority list on the relational structure. So I'll never forget an older pastor coming up to me and seeing the tension that was going on, and I had shared a little bit about the tension to me. He said this one line that got me back into the proper structure of trying to give my best to the person that needed it most. And he said this to me, I'll never forget it. Scott, the line of need in humanity is endless, and you're not the Messiah. How's that for setting somebody straight? You've heard it the phrase that says something has to give. When it comes to relationships, because of the capacity that is limited, something has to give. So the question is, how do you set up the right priorities in relationship so that you can give the best to the people that need it most? God gives us it in the scriptures. It's a priority list of relationship. The first one is God. The second one's your spouse. The third one's your kids. Now, some of you right now go, wait a minute. How did kids get to be second? I'll tell you why. Because they're going to leave someday. At least you hope they leave. And it's going to be you and your spouse. And if you haven't worked on that relationship while your kids are at home, it might be too late to work on it after they're gone. Your extended family and friends. You got parents, you got cousins, you got nephews, you got friend community that you want to hang out with and have fun with. The community of Christ right here. It's part of the priority list. Getting involved with the community of believers, growing your relationship with Christ, getting to know each other, getting deeper into God's word, and finding out who Jesus is, and growing that number one priority of God. Those two kind of connect each other. The last one, people who need to hear the gospel. In other words, our lives should be about being involved with unchurched people, people who are far from God, and building relationships with them, not because they're a target, not because there's some kind of commission that we get from bringing someone into the community of Christ, but because they need to hear the message of grace. So that's the priority list. Now, it doesn't mean you don't have other kinds of friends or peripheral friends, but the Bible gives us this priority list so that we can give the best to the things that matter most. Now, it's really important we understand this, because if you don't establish proper relational boundaries, ultimately, now listen very carefully, ultimately you will build up resentment for the person that you haven't built boundaries for. In other words, you'll be in relationship with this person and you will feel like I can't say no. You'll feel like I'm obligated to do something. You'll feel like that. And they keep infringing on the time and energy that you have. And because maybe you're a compliant, or because you don't want to rock the boat or anything, you'll do these things and you'll keep doing them even though your capacity is depleted. And the next time they come around, you know there's going to be some kind of obligation. So every time that you give in without saying, no, I don't have the time to do that, I don't have the ability to do that right now, all of a sudden when you see that person, you start building resentment for that person because why? They're infringing on your capacity. Some of you don't even know that you're building resentment for the people around you. Here's some ways to try to figure out if you're building resentment because people are infringing upon your relational capacity. The first one is maybe you feel discomfort. Maybe when that person comes around, you're stressed, you feel anxious, you feel maybe fearful, or some kind of, you feel like you're going to be obligated in some way to do something, to say something. Maybe you feel disadvantaged. Maybe you feel taken advantage of or underappreciated or manipulated in the relationship. Maybe you feel disempowered. When they're around, you feel unable to say no without suffering some kind of consequence of some kind of passive-aggressive comment or action. Maybe it's disproportionate. The relationship is one-sided. You feel like you're always giving, but you're getting nothing in return. All of these are signs that maybe you're building up resentment in a marriage, in a relationship, in a friendship. I remember someone telling me years ago, if you let someone treat you 5 different ways, they'll treat you all 5. Here's the bottom line. The bottom line is if you don't set relational boundaries in your life, other people will set them for you. So you have to first establish relational boundaries so that you can have healthy, fun, enjoyable relationships. The second thing is now you got to enforce them. Now, boundaries are only as good as you enforce them. And everybody, me, you, everybody will infringe on our boundaries from time to time. It's just natural. Some people do it consciously, unconsciously. We just do it. But you got to enforce it when it happens. How many of you are really old like me and you remember Charlie Brown? Raise your hand. Be proud. Yes. How many are young and like Charlie Brown? Okay, all right. We got carrying on some good stuff. Charlie Brown, what's his whole thing? He's got zero boundaries, right? He's always whining about what people do to him, but he never does anything about it. I mean, how many times does he get the ball pulled out from him when he's trying to kick a field goal? Kick the ball. I love this one story. It's about Peppermint Patty, and she's talking to Charlie Brown, and she says, guess what, Chuck? The first day of school, I got sent to the principal's office, and it's your fault. Charlie Brown responds, it's my fault. How's it my fault? Why do you say everything is my fault? Peppermint Patty responds, you're my friend, aren't you? He says, yeah. Well, you should have been a better influence on me. So how do you enforce boundaries? How do you go about doing this? Well, there's a lot to this. That's why you need to read the book Boundaries. You need to do some more talking with people, maybe a counselor, a trusted Christian friend. But the bottom line is the power of yes and no. Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Because if you don't use those two words appropriately, then your whole relational world gets skewed. It becomes unclear because you're working your way, around the bush, a long direction. You don't ever really give an answer. That's why boundaries has to be enforced by yes or no. I love this one story about how a wife enforced these two words. The wife says to the husband, do you want dinner? And the husband says, sure. What are my choices? She said, yes or no. That's a good one right there. Why don't you got to use that one right there? But here's the thing as we go about setting relational boundaries, and this is the thing that is going to be something that you're going to have to discern and you're going to have to work with. But sometimes there are seasons in our life where we have to change some yeses to nos so that we can say yes to greater priorities that have come up in that season. So stay with me on this. How many remember this movie right here? What movie is it? Karate Kid. How many saw the new Karate Kid? Not as good as the old one. Not even close. If you haven't seen the old Karate Kid, this is it. What was Mr. Miyagi's number one thing that he would say to Daniel? He would say this. He would say, all of life needs balance, Daniel-san. Which is untrue. We think that, right? We think that in order for us to have a really good, healthy life, that all the time, life has to be in balance. And so it's kind of like me trying right now, and I don't do this very well, trying to balance this ruler on my finger here. This is the way we think life should go. And so every time that something comes along, a thing that, throws it out of balance, we think we're failing. And it's a very delicate thing is balance. And sometimes life is in balance. It's really good. But it's not true all the time. Sometimes what you have to do is adjust your boundaries in a season so that you can pay attention to something at a greater level where you have to adjust it to one thing. Let me give you a good example. Years ago in 2000, when we were invited to come to Green Valley, my daughter was in 4th grade going into 5th grade, my oldest daughter. And so when we came here, she was leaving her entire set of friends that she had grown up with to that point, all the people that she had known. She was going to a new school trying to make a new set of friends. Now, for any 4th grader, 5th grader, this is a tough transition. I mean, in adults it's tough, but for a 4th and 5th grader, it's really tough. So I'll never forget one day where she said that she had no friends, and I was like, you're the most friendly person in the world. How do you have no friends? And this was at school. She wasn't making any friends. And then I drove by, and I saw her sitting on the bench by herself at recess. No one around her. So something in my mind goes, okay, now this is what we have to do. We have to adjust our priorities, our boundaries, and shift the capacity to my daughter in order to get her settled and get her into life here in the mainstream of life. So we did that. We moved all the way over here and we said no to a lot of our own relational things that we wanted to do in order for her to get set, because that was a priority in our life. Now here's the thing. We think if we shift priorities that all of life's going to come crashing down. But that's not what happens when you shift it in the right direction for the right reasons, godly reasons. What happens is God comes to the side that is unbalanced, and he puts his finger on it. And he says, you're doing the right thing. Stay focused on this. Give the best of your best to what you have right now in this season, and I'm going to make things balance out. That's the supernatural thing that God does for us when we create the right boundaries for the right season. And the reality in life is that you're going to go through seasons that you're going to have to shift. Some of you right now might be going through some kind of spiritual crisis. Maybe you've gotten to the point where, hey, you're at the end of yourself. Your whole thing that you've been trying to do in life is just falling apart, and you got to have some answers spiritually. Well, you need to shift your capacity to now search after God and give that the attention that it needs. Whatever that means. Reading your Bible, praying more, getting involved in a small group, coming to Big Wednesdays, coming to church. You shift your limited capacity now to build that relationship. For some of you right now where the marriage is on the fritz, you guys know you're kind of walking away from each other, or you're feeling like that nothing is working, the romance is gone, you got to do something, then what you need to do is shift your priorities and create boundaries with other things so that you can pay attention and give your best to that thing, your relationship. Maybe you have a kid that needs extra attention. Maybe you need to say yes to that and no to other things. The power of boundaries in your life is as simple as your courage to let your yes be yes and your no be no. Now, here's what everybody's saying. Scott, if I enforce my boundaries, it's going to make the other person upset, uncomfortable. It might change our relationship in other ways, in other areas. We don't set boundaries based on what someone else feels. We set boundaries based on what God is calling us to do. And if a person can't respect those boundaries that you feel like God is calling you to do based on the priorities that he's put in front of us, then that might not be a relationship that you want to be in. Man, if I had a friend come up and tell me, hey, Scott, man, we can't hang out every week anymore. We can't do this because right now, I got my kid right here and I'm going to go, you know what, bro? Absolutely. Whenever you get through that season, man, I'm here. And if you need me in that season, I'll be there. But if we can't do what we normally do, that's fine. Those are the kinds of friendships you want to be in. Those are the kinds of relationships you want to build. So the first thing we have to do is we have to establish our boundaries. Then we have to enforce our boundaries with yes and no. And when you do these first two things, now what happens is you have a great capacity to express authentic love through boundaries. You see, there's a huge difference between loving others without healthy boundaries and loving them with healthy boundaries. When we love without healthy boundaries, we can actually do more harm than good. We can actually enable people to go down bad pathways or get into dysfunctional relationships if we don't have healthy boundaries. But if we do, we can actually have relationships that are built on solid ground, that can weather difficult times, that can help us all move in the right direction. See, loving through healthy boundaries engages without enabling. And so what does that look like? Well, the Bible tells us what it looks like. It's in Galatians chapter 6. Listen to what it says. Now stay with me carefully. There's two words that you're going to need to really hear. It says, carry each other's burdens. And in this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. Then he kind of switches directions a little bit here. He says, if anyone thinks there's something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then now watch. He kind of turns now from the first statement. He says, then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. The Greek word for burden is excess. And the visual is like carrying a boulder. It's like what we have right here, advertising our series. It's something that is we're collapsing under the weight of it. And what the Bible instructs us in relationship is that when you're in a relationship with someone that's carrying a boulder of life, that we need to help with that. That's why we do the stuff we do at Green Valley. That's why we have, common ground. That's why we have things like divorce care. Things like grief share, or things like the funeral ministry, or our next gen ministry. There's a lot of boulders in those things, that season of life that those people are going through. As a matter of fact, one person was walking to a DC class a while back, and as they were walking, I didn't know where they were going, and I said, hey, where are you going? And they said, well, I'm trying to get to room 300. I said, oh, great, cool, that's good. So how you doing? And the person started crying right there while we were walking to the class. And as I came around the corner, I saw room 300, divorce care. Divorce is a boulder. And anybody that's going through that needs some help to carry that burden. That's why we do those things. You know, boulders in life are like major health issues. They're loss of someone that, is dear to you. It's a child who's in trouble or gone sideways. Or maybe you're a single parent and you've been left all on your own to care for your kids. Or maybe you have older parents that no longer can care for themselves, and now you've got to step in and help them. All those are boulders. And we at Green Valley want to be a church that helps people with the boulders of life. But notice what he says here next. He says the word load. Each one should carry their own load, which a load means a knapsack, which means the daily challenges of life, like getting up and going to work and raking the leaves. Some of these are the daily challenges of life, and dealing with the kid not doing homework. Those are the daily challenges. It says we should carry our own load. You see, you can't have healthy relationships unless people take responsibility for their own actions, attitudes, and demands of normal everyday life. Let me just ask parents here. How many parents here have ever heard your kids say, I'm bored? Raise your hand. Who's responsible for their boredom? They are. Here's some responses you can give to that when you hear that. You could say to them, hey, let me show you how the vacuum works. It's fascinating. I can hear the leaves outside calling your name, saying, rake us, rake us. These are all responses you can give. But here's the deal. While it may feel loving trying to keep someone from the regular pains and struggles of life, what you're really doing is keeping them from the very thing that will help them know how to do life. Pain has a purpose, and sometimes loving people is not keeping them from the pain, but walking them through it. One of the things that we have here at Green Valley that I am so grateful for is we have people who are uniquely gifted to discern between loads and burdens. They're our pastoral partners, and if you're here during the week, especially on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you would see that multiple people come in crisis situations where life has just gone sideways and they need some help. And our pastoral partners are here and they volunteer their time, but they have been given the gift to sit there and go, okay, this is a load that you need to carry. We'll pray for you, but you need to carry this. But this is a boulder that we need to step in and help you with. And it's amazing to see them do their work, because most of the time when we're in trouble or in crisis, we just come and dump on people the load and the burden. But there's actually part of it that's our responsibility. And every time that someone walks out of there, I won't say every time because that's a little too cocky. Most every time they walk out of there, people have come to a place where they're willing to carry their own load, but we're going to help them with their burden. See, here's the bottom line. If you want to have healthy relationships, you have to have healthy boundaries. God created us to be in healthy, growing, thriving relationships. And I got to tell you, there's nothing like healthy relationships. God gave us relationships to have fun and enjoy life. And I say this all the time. Maybe you'll hear it for the first time because you're new here today, but you've heard me say this before. My family and I, when my kids were growing up, and even to this day, one of the things that we love doing together is going to Disneyland. And why? Because all of us enjoy it. And when we go, we just have a great time and we're hanging out with others. It's awesome. And you want to know why? Because it's in relationship that we're doing it and having fun. Here's the deal. If I went to Disneyland by myself, not only is that a little creepy, but it wouldn't be any fun. Because relationship is God's gift to us to enjoy all the creation that He's given us. So in order to maximize this gift, you and I have to have healthy boundaries in our relationship so that we can enjoy it, have fun, know what the goal is, how to grow deeper. You know, one of the things that God does that we don't really grasp in this context is that when it comes to relationship between God and man, God removed every boundary except for one. He removed the boundary of sin. He removed the boundary of not being in relationship with God. He removed the boundary of not being able to connect with God on a spiritual level. He removed all those boundaries except for one. And that is a boundary that you and I have to say yes or no to. And that's the boundary of, yes, I will allow you to be the leader of my life. Yes, I do understand that I need your forgiveness in my life. Yes, I do want to be a part of your family. I do want to be a son and daughter of God. And so I accept your forgiveness and your gift of grace to me. That's the only boundary that we have to remove in order to be in a relationship with God. And it's all in how you wield yes and no. Now, for some of you today, you've already said yes. That's probably the majority. Yes, God, and thank you. And you're in relationship with God, and thank you for removing all those boundaries. For some of you, maybe you've just said no for one reason or another. My encouragement to you who've said no is to seek. Seek God. Keep coming. Whether it's here, Big Wednesdays, keep coming. It doesn't matter if you don't believe or not. We just want you to keep coming because ultimately what we believe is if you seek long enough, you will find, because that's a promise in the Scripture.